There was a girl in Pennsylvania who couldn't raise her voice, and when her kindergarten teacher asked her to shout "fire" during a fire drill so they could hear her from the hallway, she barely managed a whisper. Today, that same voice can make arenas of 20,000 people shake. This is the story of Elizabeth Mae Hale, whom the world knows simply as Lzzy. On October 10, 1983, in Red Lion, Pennsylvania, the fourth woman in her family to be named Elizabeth Mae was born. Before she even entered this world, she already carried the weight of a name repeated across generations. Yet she had also been born with a legacy of breaking what had been written. And what no one knew then was that this Elizabeth would be the one to change the family story forever. Her childhood felt like something out of a movie. When Lzzy was 9 years old, her parents, Roger and Beth Hale, made a decision that would sound like madness to any suburban family today. They moved to a log cabin in the middle of the woods, along the Appalachian Trail, with no neighbors for 10 miles in any direction. A life with sheep, chickens, and a donkey trailer that smelled like hay. A routine that pulled them away from the city, but that, without them even realizing it yet, was drawing them closer to something much bigger. Lzzy grew up surrounded by nature and music. Before she could read fluently, she already knew how to play piano. By 5 years old, her fingers were already searching for melodies on the keys, and she wasn't alone in that. Her younger brother, RJ, had found the drums with the same naturalness with which she had found the piano. How did two siblings in the woods, exploring music in a completely wholesome and nurturing environment, end up becoming major players in the history of rock? But that's not all. Can you picture this? A family that sells their sheep and their chickens to buy a sound system and turns the donkey trailer, still smelling like a farm, into the first stage for a band that doesn't even have a name yet. Roger Hale, the father, didn't just bless that path. He threw himself into it entirely. He took on the necessary role of bassist in his children's band, and their mother, Beth, took the reins of logistics. The Hale family was the first great source of encouragement and drive in Lzzy's life. In 1997, at 13 years old and with her brother RJ just 10, they founded their first band, Halestorm. The name carried deep meaning. It was the family's last name turned into a storm. And in that result, combining Hale and Storm, there was already something that foreshadowed what was to come. Something familiar, but with the raw force of a natural phenomenon. The founding moment Lzzy remembers with a mix of pride and humor was Halestorm's first official show at a county talent fair in the summer of 1997. When their turn came and they took the stage, they played a song they had written themselves called "Love is Power," 5 minutes long with a drum solo in the middle. They came in third. The winners were a girl doing tap dance and cowboy boots who, according to Lzzy, was considerably cuter and more charming than they were. Years later, when she was asked about that bronze trophy from a small town fair, Lzzy said she kept it right next to her Grammy, and that to her, both meant exactly the same thing. Their next shows were at churches and local events in the area. In those early years, Halestorm was described as a Christian rock band, with messages aimed at teenagers about avoiding drugs, sex, and violence. The stage was still modest, and RJ's drum kit was a special instrument that could spin and flip upside down while he kept playing, which turned the younger brother into a full-on circus act. One more detail from that childhood worth mentioning. Lzzy didn't actually learn guitar as a kid. She picked it up at 16, almost by accident. And yet, that guitar she grabbed as a teenager would become her second voice, the accompaniment and extension of everything she couldn't quite say with words. Because sometimes, instruments choose their owners too. And through all of it, a future was beginning to take shape. The girl who couldn't scream in kindergarten was learning, slowly but with great determination, to have a voice. One that grew more powerful with every passing day. There's something very important that the story of success tends to leave out. everything that happened before success existed. In the case of Lzzy Hale and Halestorm, that's everything that went down across 12 years. More than a decade playing small venues, county festivals, and opening for bands nobody remembers. 12 years building an audience one fan at a time, traveling in the farm trailer, sleeping in the car, and playing wherever they could. And doing it, on top of everything, as a family. Roger drove the bus and played bass, Beth managed the schedule, and Lzzy and RJ handled the music. At 17, Lzzy had one of those small moments that end up defining an identity. A fan wrote on the band's website and, either by mistake or by instinct, called her Lzzy instead of Lizzy, and she loved it. There was something about that spelling without the I that felt stronger, more personal, more real and authentic. From that point on, Elizabeth Mae Hale disappeared from the marquees because Lzzy Hale had arrived to stay. In 1999, at 15 years old, Lzzy and RJ recorded their first EP, titled Don't Mess with the Time Man, produced with whatever they could get their hands on, borrowed equipment, and a willpower that didn't know the word impossible. As you can probably imagine if you haven't heard it, it wasn't a perfect record. It was the genuine proof of two teenagers who were taking what they did seriously and doing it with a whole lot of heart. That EP circulated through the local Pennsylvania circuit, made it into the hands of fans who dubbed it onto cassettes and passed it around to friends, and slowly built the foundation that kept growing right alongside them. In 2003, they recorded a second EP, and by then there was already something about Halestorm that was hard for audiences to ignore. A girl who played guitar, wrote the songs, commanded the stage, and sang with a voice that demanded attention. In 2003, Joe Hottinger joined the band as guitarist, and the following year, in 2004, Josh Smith came in on bass. Roger Hale was finally able to put down the bass and go back to simply being the proud dad behind the wheel. Halestorm's classic lineup was complete. Finally, after years of playing and sending demos to labels that never called back, June 28, 2005 brought the news that changed everything. Atlantic Records signed Halestorm. At that moment, Lzzy was 21 years old and had been playing in this band for 8 years. But, as we already know, signing with a label isn't crossing the finish line. It's barely the starting gun. 4 more years passed before the debut album saw the light of day, a period of preparation, touring as an opening act, learning the rhythms of the industry, and building from the ground up with the patience of someone who knows they've got something real in their hands. On April 28, 2009, the self-titled debut album Halestorm was released, and with it came I Get Off, the first single, a hard rock track with bold lyrics and a voice that arrived to shake things up. The rock industry had heard talented women before, but few with that combination of ferocity and precision, of guitarist and vocalist, of songwriter and frontwoman, all in one person, all in one mind. What no one really knew during those years was that Lzzy carried something invisible from the stage through all of it. The kind of pressures that push many musicians into anxiety, depression, and imposter syndrome. These were quiet companions the young artist had been living with for a long time. She smiled under the lights, gave everything at every show. But then, alone on the tour bus or in a hotel room, she wrestled with an inner voice telling her she wasn't good enough, that she didn't deserve to be there, and that sooner or later, someone was going to figure out she was a fraud. That ugly voice is part of the story too, because Lzzy didn't silence it by ignoring it. She faced it, named it, and years later, turned it into her banner. There's one word that captures Halestorm's philosophy, and that word is simply play. The band reached 250 shows in 12 months during the peak years of their career. That means more than one show every other day. It's almost a show per day, meaning you live inside a tour bus, change cities before your body and mind even register where you just were, and see the world through stages, dressing rooms, overnight drives, and stadium parking lots. But there's something Lzzy always understood. Rock survives live. The album opens the doors, but the stage is what keeps them open. And for years, Halestorm earned the scene's respect through performances that left audiences speechless and a reputation that spread by word of mouth. Among the countless shows they played, they shared stages with Joan Jett, Alice Cooper, and Eric Church, opened for bands that later opened for them, and built a fan community lovingly known as the Lzzy Birds, a family that kept growing city by city, show by show. But above everything else, many of us believe the foundation of this band's success lies in songs that get under people's skin because they speak to real things: pain, desire, anger, and the strength to keep going. In April 2012, the band released their second studio album, The Strange Case Of. One single in particular, however, would change the band's story forever. Love Bites, So Do I. An absolutely massive hard rock track with a killer hook, serious attitude, and that voice of Lzzy's that could go from soft to brutal in a fraction of a second. If you're here, you've definitely heard it, and you already know it's a banger. But then came the moment nobody had even dared to dream about, though deep down everyone had wished for it. They were on stage, of course, playing in Madison, Wisconsin, when Lzzy received the news right there under the lights. Love Bites, So Do I had been nominated for a Grammy in the Best Hard Rock Metal Performance category. The moment was so unexpectedly incredible that the crowd went wild, and the video went viral. On Grammy night, February 10th, 2013, a new page in rock history was written, something that had never happened before in that category. A band fronted by a woman wasn't just nominated, they won. And there was one small detail that gave the whole thing an extra layer of color. When the winner was announced, they read the song title before the band's name. Sitting in their seats, they heard the L of Love Bites, and for a split second thought it wasn't them, until reality hit. Halestorm became the first band with a female frontwoman to win that category in the entire history of the Grammy Awards. And Lzzy Hale was there on that stage, holding the golden gramophone in her hands, showing the world that when there's dedication and hard work, anything becomes possible. How would you celebrate a night like that? And yes, as you'd expect, there was a party, with none other than Sting, Katy Perry, Quincy Jones, and plenty of other celebrities from the industry. Lzzy, a couple glasses of wine in, approached Katy Perry with an energy she herself later described as a little too aggressive, and introduced herself. Katy Perry may not remember it, but for Lzzy, that moment will last forever. And, of course, so will the Grammy. There are artists who build an image, and then there are those who build a truth. Lzzy Hale always chose the second option, even when it was the harder and more costly one. In October 2014, during a fan Q&A session on Twitter, Lzzy answered with a casualness that caught many fans completely off guard. She confirmed that she was bisexual. It wasn't really a secret. Her family, her bandmates, and everyone close to her already knew. But what was new was that her fans were now finding out too. Years later, in 2022, during Pride Month, she expanded on that message with a more detailed statement on Instagram that quickly went viral around the world. Keep in mind, this was an industry that at the time still looked sideways at any declaration that stepped outside the mold. True to her character, Lzzy chose honesty. Not to generate headlines, but because authenticity wasn't a marketing strategy for her. It was simply who she was. Her openness was rewarded immediately by her fans, with love, gratitude, and the recognition of people who, for the first time, saw someone like themselves in a place they wished they could be. A year later, in 2015, Halestorm released their third album, Into the Wildlife, which debuted at number 5 on the Billboard 200, the highest chart position the band had ever reached. Love also found its way into Halestorm. Joe Hottinger, the guitarist who had joined the band back in 2003 and had spent more than a decade as Lzzy's closest musical partner, also won her heart and became her partner. And in that context of success and visibility, Lzzy began speaking openly about something that many artists in her position would have kept under lock and key, out of shame or fear of exposure: mental health. She described depression as being trapped at the bottom of a well, watching the world pass by from below without being able to reach it. She talked about paralyzing anxiety, panic attacks, and imposter syndrome that doesn't go away even when the Grammy is sitting right there on the shelf, shining. She also spoke about the alcoholism she fell into for years, which she used as an anesthetic to escape reality, something she didn't find the courage to break free from until December 2023. There's a very powerful sense of closeness that comes from hearing someone with her level of success say out loud, "I struggle with this too. I fall apart too. I have days where I don't know if what I do is worth it. I'm human, just like all of you." Lzzy became part of the Recording Academy's mental health panel and a voice for those who don't have the privilege of speaking from a stage. To close this chapter, in 2018, Halestorm released Vicious, which debuted at number 8 on the Billboard 200, the band's second top 10 album. The machine was still running, and Lzzy, the core that kept it all moving, was also learning, for the first time in her life, how to heal, and above all, how to take care of herself. 2020 started like a normal year, but 3 months in, the world stopped. It happened to all of us. For Halestorm, it was something more than that, because it meant the longest stretch without playing live since Lzzy and RJ had stepped onto that first stage 23 years earlier. With no shows, no tours, and none of the adrenaline that had fueled their entire adult life, Lzzy was faced with something artists who live in constant motion rarely confront: silence, stillness, and the question of who you are when you're not on stage. During that time, Halestorm launched a relief campaign called #RoadieStrong to raise funds for live entertainment crew members who had lost their jobs due to the restrictions of the so-called new normal. Lzzy, as someone who had built herself from the ground up, always understood that rock isn't just a band's name on a marquee. It's the entire team of people who make that band possible. And 2 years later, when the world started moving again, Halestorm released a new album. Back from the Dead, out in May 2022, was about coming back from the wreckage, finding yourself again after the chaos, and music as a way to survive. The title wasn't an empty metaphor. It was a way of telling the story of everything that had happened during those years of forced absence. The years that followed brought something unexpected, even for someone as used to surprises as Lzzy. In 2024, she received a call from Skid Row, the iconic 80s hard rock band. They needed a temporary vocalist because their singer, Eric Grunwald, had been forced to step away due to health issues, and they thought of Lzzy Hale. The weight of that call is hard to fully grasp unless you know that Lzzy grew up listening to Skid Row, and that Slave to the Grind was a cornerstone of her relationship with hard rock. Taking the stage as the voice of that band was, in her own words, a full circle moment, and she delivered with so much conviction that hearing her there felt exactly the way she must have imagined it in her dreams. 4 shows across the United States, each one now a permanent page in rock history. Speaking of historic moments and dreams come true, you don't want to miss what happened next in this artist's life. Picture July 2025, a date many consider the greatest day in the history of heavy metal. Back to the beginning, the farewell concert of Black Sabbath and Ozzy Osbourne. A historic, once-in-a-lifetime show with the genre's greatest names gathered on a single stage. Lzzy Hale was invited to be part of it, and she was the only woman on that lineup. That night, she stood surrounded by the most sacred names in heavy metal, and she belonged there, then and forever. That girl from Red Lion, Pennsylvania, stood before the metal world and made it shake. That same month, Halestorm released Everest, their 6th studio album, a title that, with its unmistakable meaning, showed the world once again that after everything they've been through, the summit is still where they're headed. There's a phrase, or more accurately, an epithet that Lzzy repeats in interviews, on social media, and in conversations with fans. It's the alias that captures what she represents better than any analysis ever could: Ambassador for Rock. She gave herself that title, and no one who has ever seen her perform, speak, or simply exist in this world could argue with it. But what does it mean to be an ambassador? Lzzy sees herself as the bridge between the genre and the people who haven't walked through its doors yet. She stands at the threshold and says, "There's a place for you here too." And in doing so, she's helped make rock, a genre that for decades was a restricted access territory for women, feel like somewhere where you can actually belong. In 2021, Gibson named her the company's first female brand ambassador in its entire history, and it wasn't just a symbolic gesture. It was recognition of someone who has spent decades proving that a woman with an Explorer guitar is not the exception to the rule, but a reality that needs to be more widespread. Lzzy has designed signature models for Gibson, Epiphone, and Kramer, and in 2022, she gifted one of her most iconic guitars to Danny Villarreal of The Warning, a young Mexican metal band, a gesture of continuity, of passing the torch forward, because the flame doesn't die out. It gets handed on. Another quality that doesn't show up on any award or chart, but defines Lzzy as well as anything, is her relationship with the people who follow her. Her fans are the Lzzy Birds, a community built with love and patience, one step and one show at a time. Lzzy speaks to them straight, with the same honesty as someone talking to a close friend. She shares her struggles, talks about her anxiety, her bisexuality, her fears, and her victories. This powerhouse of a singer never built a fictional character. She's a real person, and in the world of curated images we live in, that is both far harder and far more valuable. There's also something Lzzy said in an interview about mental health that has stayed with a lot of people. She said that all the monsters feed each other, that depression calls on anxiety, anxiety calls on imposter syndrome calls on alcohol, and all of it coexists in silence inside someone who, on stage, looks invincible and unbreakable. And yet, what makes that testimony extraordinary isn't the darkness it describes. It's the decision to keep going anyway, without excuses, and to always come out on the other side with something learned. One of the bravest decisions of her life was quitting drinking in late 2023, after years of using alcohol as a shield. She shared that milestone in the same direct, warm voice she sings with. So, what's left when you add up all these chapters? What remains is a woman who started out in a loving family home in a cabin in the woods and ended up on the historic farewell stage with Ozzy Osbourne. A woman who turned anxiety into heartfelt lyrics, shyness into a roar, and everything she learned from childhood into a Grammy. A woman who showed an entire generation of girls that a guitar, metal, and strength have no gender, that everyone is welcome because rock belongs to all of us, that being honest about pain doesn't make you weak, it makes you human, and that what's real connects far deeper than any image the music industry could ever manufacture. The girl who couldn't scream in kindergarten learned something that very few people ever do. A voice is not just a sound. It is meaning, emotion, decision, and courage. It's the determination to keep raising the bar without ever stopping being yourself.